Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to a new episode of my comic book movies retro reviews. A series of video that I publish every 2 weeks where I take a look at some of the older comic book movies that came before the MCU and the DCEU and all that stuff that we get today. That period of time where comic book movies weren't taken seriously, where they were frowned upon, where they were laughed upon, where they couldn't get massive actors. With the exception of maybe the Batmans and the Supermans at the time. You know the sort of era I'm talking, that sort of 80s, 90s era, those forgotten films, those much maligned, unmemorable, nonsense films that people just want to discard because they're old. And what I'm doing is I'm revisiting them, I'm reviewing them, and I'm looking at if there is any hope for them, if there is any thing of significance that I can take out of them, if there's any worth within these films. So that's it, that's the idea behind this series. So like I said, new episode today. I'm going to be taking a look at the DC Superman spin-off movie, not Supergirl, no, Still. Let's talk about this character and this film. Okay, yeah, so like I said, Still, which is a film that came out in 1997, starring Shaquille O'Neal in the title role of this character, Still. This film was rated PG with a runtime of 1 hour and 37 minutes and was released on August the 15th of 1997. Little history about the character first. Okay, in the early 90s, DC knew that they were going to marry Superman and they were going to marry Lois Lane in the comics. Why do I bring this up, you ask? What's the relevance of that to this? Well, that was going to coincide with episodes of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, the TV series that was being shown in the early 90s. In the meantime, they had a gap to fill. They had a storyline that they needed to fill from here to here, and sales were flagging on the Superman comics. So the idea was conceived to kill off Superman. Let's do a Death of Superman storyline where we shall kill off the Man of Steel at the hands of this brand new villain called Doomsday and take it from there. This storyline led into what was then called Funeral for a Friend, which was an arc of story with throughout the Superman comics where the other heroes dealt with the death of Superman and all this sort of stuff. And then ultimately we got the Reign of the Supermen, which came after Funeral for a Friend. Now, Reign of the Supermen was a sort of return for the character, but in a mysterious 4 forms. You had 4 characters conceived for this storyline. One being Superboy, which was a direct clone of Superman. Another being the Eradicator, which is a Kryptonian heritage type of robotical person type thing that took on the mantle of Superman to keep the heritage of Superman and Krypton going in that manner. Another was a cyborg Superman, who's sort of like Terminator-ish, I should say, so half human face, half robot face, with the memory of Superman and Clark and all this sort of thing. But that would go on to turn out to be the villain of the piece. And then we had one other character that was a character named John Henry Irons, who was based around the African-American folk hero John Henry. Now, John Henry Irons, his first appearance in the comics was in the Adventures of Superman issue 500 in June of 1993. This character was created by Louis Simonson and John Bogdanove. Now, this character here, he was an African-American scientist, a big, imposing African-American fella who created a suit of steel that could replicate the powers of Superman, and thusly he stepped into the role to honour Superman and carry on the legacy of the Man of Steel. And this character's name was Steel. He had a full metallic armour all over him, red flowing cape with a massive big steel S on his chest, and a fantastic character to boot, a fantastic character that still makes the rounds in the comics today. And out of the four of these characters, he was probably one of the most interesting, because he was just a normal man from a different background, and you know, you've created a likeable character of ethnic origin as well, a character that's interesting and enjoyable. Yeah, so DC, Warner Brothers, in their infinite wisdom, decided to make this into a film. Yes, so this film was made, like I said, and released in 1997, and this was the second superhero film, to star an African-American lead. 2 weeks before, we'd had the release of Spawn, which brings me into a little plug, which I have done Spawn in this series of videos. I'm going to chuck that video out. So, in the director's chair and writing was Kenneth Johnson. Now, Kenneth Johnson is a writer and director who's had his hand in TV for a very, very long time, dating back to the original Bionic Woman. He's also been involved in the original V series, the Incredible Hulk, the Alien Nation TV movies, of which he has directed as well as the remake of the Bionic Woman in 2008, the remake of V he was involved in. He's directed Jag, the TV series, episodes of that, the Alien Nation TV movies. He's been behind directing the Vs, the early Vs, and the Hulk. So he's got a wealth of talent behind him in TV. And unfortunately, this is where this begins to fail. The film had a budget of $16 million and would only go on to gross worldwide $1,710,000. That's not taking into account sales of DVD and things like that. And yeah, now this film had Shaquille O'Neal in the title role of John Henry Irons, aka Steel, Annabeth Gish, who plays a character called Sparky, who is still working today, and she's recently been in and is in the TV series called Barry. Judd Nelson of Breakfast Club fame, that sort of 80s comedy era, plays the film's villain, Nathaniel Burke. And we've also got support cast in it, including Richard Roundtree. Yes, Shaft, the original Shaft. So this film here, now, I remember when this came out, it was cheap then, it looked cheap, it felt cheap, and I saw it the once. I have recently acquired it on Blu-ray, on DVD, sorry, because I wanted to rewatch it for this series. And coming from a background of collecting comic books and all this sort of thing, and reading comic books for near on that goes into 4 decades, this stuff does intrigue me, it does interest me, but I know going in that this is a bad film. Let's not make any bones about that. So the storyline around this film is you're introduced to John Henry Irons. You're introduced to the 3 primary characters of John Henry Irons, Sparky, his female sort of love interest lady in the chair, so to speak, and Nathaniel Burke, Judd Nelson, and they all work for the military. Yeah, and they're developing these a new breed of weaponry, these sort of sonic weapons, lasers, all this sort of thing. And the character played by Judd Nelson, Nathaniel Burke, he's got bigger things in mind. He wants to make a name for himself with the use of these weapons. So he trials one beyond its capability, something that has never been tested, causing an accident, causing Sparky to be in an accident, losing the use of her legs, and John Henry Irons saving her, and then there's a tribunal and all this sort of thing. Judd Nelson's character obviously gets booted out of the army. John Henry Irons, he decides to leave the military after this, and Sparky's obviously discharged because she's lost the use of her lower body. So John Henry Irons heads home to Los Angeles. Just by chance, Judd Nelson heads there as well. He goes there because he's got an old friend there that he knows who sells arms under the table, so to speak, dodgy arms dealings. So he goes and gets into business with him on developing these new weapons that they then give to the gangs on the streets. The gangs from the neighbourhoods that John Henry Irons has grown up in and comes from. These young African-American youths that are sort of disenchanted and you know, they utilise them to test these weapons out, and when they get recordings of this, they put it up on the internet and thus start a bidding war between high profile criminals to pay for these weapons and make money like that. But on the same turn, they're stealing from banks and all this sort of nonsense going on, and it's up to John Henry Irons to put a stop to this, because he comes to understand that it's his weapons that are being utilised, because just by chance he happens to see a robbery going down. There's a lot of conveniences within the story context of this film. So then he fashions this suit of his with the help of his Uncle Joe, Richard Roundtree, and Annabeth Gish's character Sparky, who he gets out of hospital to come and help with him. Like I said, she's his lady in the chair, figuratively and literally speaking. And thus we have this story of him saving people from blah, 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 blah. Yes, so this film, my thoughts on this film. It's highly unfortunate that, you know, that you've got a fantastic character like John Henry Irons in the DC world that has been given this kind of a feature film. There's no reference to Superman in this. There are a few throwaway jokes to Batman, and Superman is mentioned, and Shaquille O'Neal does have a Man of Steel Superman tattoo on his arm, but there's nothing to do with Superman. This film has literally nothing to do with Superman. They've jettisoned the red cape. They've jettisoned the steel S that he has on his chest. So he's literally just a man in a metallic suit. Yes, so there's forget Superman. That's what this film wants you to do. Forget Superman. So you're just left with this character in a suit taking on weapons, people, and gangs. Now, the film, like I said, with $16 million budget, not very big. That being said, there are shots with helicopters and stuff like this, and some model works of helicopters getting blown up. There are tanks in it, and so the budget isn't, it's used wisely on what you get. That being said, it's just not a very compelling film. You can tell that director Kenneth Johnson has come from a TV background, because it does very much feel like a TV pilot. I mean, watching it, you know, okay, to coin a man in a suit as the character within this film, I could easily take the character of Steel out of this film and put RoboCop into it and have it as an episode of the RoboCop TV series. That's very much how it plays out. It is of that sort of an ilk. You know, Shaquille O'Neal, although he does his best with it, and to be fair to him, he ain't an actor. He isn't the worst part of the film by any means. Judd Nelson is just hamming it up, and there's some really dodgy scenes between characters, like, you know, when people are sort of giving themselves these sort of looks, like, you know, just looks that are unnatural and unfounded and not required, that you wouldn't do in real life. Just really odd scenes. Richard Roundtree, he's fantastic in it. He just steals proceedings. He's a fantastic actor anyway. Whenever Richard Roundtree pops up in something, it always elevates it above what it actually is. He elevates his scenes, the scenes he's in, above what they should be. He's very, very good in it. But beyond that, there's nothing real of any real interest I can say. As for heroic parts, you have Steel walking around with his hammer, which turned into a big gun, shooting people. There are bits where he sort of is on a grappling hook and flies up. But his most heroic scene is him saving the day, and these people have been robbed, and then making an exit on a elevator as it's taking him away from them. Imagine Superman. Imagine Superman, the first Superman film, where he's rescued Lois Lane and on top of that building, and then, you know, he flies off like the hero scene as she faints. Imagine that, but he's just stood on an escalator, sort of with this heroic music playing. Yeah, just doesn't work. So that brings me on to the music within the film. They have got a hero theme for the character, and it is overused throughout the film, over and over and over and over. But other aspects of the soundtrack within the film sound like it does come from like the 70s and 80s. That sort of era of TV and this sort of thing. So it's not particularly good. So this is a film I wouldn't recommend anyone to watch, or if you do, go in with expectations extremely, extremely low. But there we go. Let's talk about some of the a little bit of trivia behind the film. Film star Shaquille O'Neal. He stands at 7'1" tall, and boy, he is an imposing individual. You know, he looks freakishly big. Shouldn't use that word really, but when he's next to other people, he looks unnatural. So much so that he had to do majority of his own stunts in this film because Warner Brothers couldn't find a stuntman to fit his size and his stature to do the stunts, so he ended up having to do them himself. Film's director actually didn't want Shaquille O'Neal in the role of John Henry Irons. He wanted Wesley Snipes, but Warner Brothers, in their infinite wisdom, decided that Shaq would be a much better suited individual for the role, for them to go ahead and sell toys. Batman and Robin, anyone? And speaking of Batman and Robin, this film made in its entire run $1,710,000. That's less than Batman and Robin made in its opening weekend. Far less. Yes, there we go. The character of Susan Sparks, Sparky, individual in the wheelchair, is actually based on the DC Comics character Oracle, who is part of the Batman universe of characters. And Oracle has been on screen before in the Birds of Prey TV series. And there we go, just a little bit of trivia about the film, just to end up proceedings. So that's it, my look at and my thoughts on the film Still from 1997 by director Kenneth Johnson, starring Shaquille O'Neal. Not a fantastic movie. Not a fantastic movie. I highly recommend you don't watch it. That's it. Anyway, this is AJ. I'm getting going. Come back in 2 weeks for another one of these, where I'll be looking at another film from the history of TV. History of comic books and on film. Any ideas, any ones you want me to watch, let me know down below. I might put them up my ladder. But I do intend on going through all of them, everything. I don't know how long that will take. Probably a very long time because there's quite a few of them. This is AJ, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care all, and goodbye.